Okay. Um, Hi, my name is Christina Interview. I'm with the Carey-Scanney Tribal Council. I'm the Fisheries Program Manager, and I've been with them for about 10 years. So the CSTC has been involved in the Sturgeon Recovery Initiative since its inception in the early 2000s. We've had groups that have worked with the juvenile sturgeon program and the spawn monitoring research, and then also we were the ones that developed the emergency release boat kit. And we've also done outreach to communities. The bycatch monitoring was developed because the fishers would get their nets torn or wrecked from the sturgeon rolling in them. And so we wanted to encourage fishers to report to us on any sturgeon they encountered. And we figured that a good way to do that would be to help them mend their nets. And so we developed these kits. So they have twine in them, a mesh, a knife if you need to cut any of the rope off, reporting forms. There's a DVD that explains how to use the kit and the background of the whole program. So these kits have been distributed, about 5 of them per community every year. And so there's usually a catch monitor in each community that is there for the salmon fishing. That's normally when the sturgeon are encountered. And so those people generally will also be the sturgeon bycatch monitor and help the fishers to fill out the forms. So that program's been running for many years now. It's been very successful in releasing lots of sturgeon back into the lakes and rivers. So as part of the First Nations food ceremonial as part of the food, social and ceremonial fisheries, First Nations go out and they fish for salmon and char, whitefish, generally using gill nets. And so as part of that fishery, they may encounter sturgeon. So when they're caught in the net, that's what's known as bycatch, because it's not the species of fish they were targeting. So we knew that it was really important to have bycatch monitors that were from the communities or a First Nation from one of the Carey-Scanney member bands, because it builds on the experience of the local people. It gets them out there meeting other, how do I?
Okay, you can start it again.
Yeah, we can,
It's
okay.
kind of
For the bycatch monitors, we knew that it was important to hire local people if we could, so that we could build the capacity of the communities and then also have a better chance of earning the trust of the local fishers. You know, it's a familiar face from the community. And so we try to do that in each community because there's a bad history with outsiders coming in and telling First Nations what to do and what they could fish or not fish. So it's really good to have the community take ownership of this kind of project and, you know, feel that, to take care of their own fish in their neighborhood, right? And to really feel connected to this, not like they're just, I don't know, just a part on the side or something, so that they can take ownership of the fish that are in their own territory. So the juvenile monitoring program came out of the technical working group. So CSTC has had somebody sitting on that working group for many years. And part of the problem was we didn't know what was happening to the juveniles. We did get the hatchery started, but we still weren't sure how well the wild juvenile were surviving, and then we needed to know how the hatchery juveniles were doing. So we developed this program to go out in the fall or late summer to try and catch the juveniles. So initially we tried all different methods. We tried bleach seine, we tried set lines, we tried angling, we tried cod traps, like pretty much every kind of trapping you could think of, and finally settled on set lines, so a line with hooks intermittently that were baited. And we realized that sockeye was the best bait for this. So we put these set lines out all over the Nechako River, and then we realized that there was a core area that they were in. So then we were focusing on the core area. And more recently, because there's a concern of how many fish may be going into the Fraser River, we've been asked to expand that project. So now we're looking at other systems. We're looking at the Stewart River, Stewart Lake, Fraser Lake, and all up and down the Fraser River. So on a typical day when the crew is going out to put out lines for juveniles, there'll be between 3 and 4 people going out on the boat. They'll have about 8 to 10 set lines. They'll have bait prepared, all their data sheets, they'll have pit tag readers. And so they'll head out and they'll set the lines a certain distance apart. It could be like 500 meters between the sets. And there's about 20 hooks on each line. So they put out the lines, they anchor them, and they got buoys. And once they've set, then they soak for about 24 hours or less, or just under. And they check them, so they pull them up, and every time they get a juvenile sturgeon, they put it in a tote with water, and they get measured for their length. They get their girth or around their belly measured. They'll weigh them. They'll scan them for a pit tag. And then if they have the radio receiver with them, and if they see that there's a antenna coming out from the sturgeon, then they can also read the radio tag on it. If it's a new fish they haven't encountered before, then they'll give it a pit tag, because every fish then has its own unique identifier. And yeah, I think that's about it. So we do make special note if it's a recapture or if it's a new fish, and that all goes into a database and gets written up at the end of the season. So the longer running program we have is the spawn monitoring, and that happens in the springtime. We start with crews going out to do telemetry, so listening for radio tags on the river. They go up and down the river, and we also have some stationary sites that can be downloaded and checked. So once the fish are moving up towards the spawning reach, we only have one known spawning reach in the whole area, and that's near Vanderhoof. So we know that once the fish are moving up towards that area, we put out our egg mats. They're big metal squares with this filter fabric on them that's coarse. And when the sturgeon lay their eggs, they're sticky, so they stick to this mat. So then we can check all the mats. There's about 80 that get put out. And then the eggs will stick to the mat, so they can pull them up and count them. And then also they get then transferred over to the hatchery, and then the hatchery will raise those wild fish, and then they'll get released at a later time. And then once the spawning is done, then we know that in about 2 weeks' time, the juveniles will hatch, or the eggs will hatch. And so then we put out fyke nets. They're these finely meshed nets that get anchored in the river downstream from where the eggs were found on the egg mats. And then we monitor those. We do a day shift and we do a night shift. Then they tend to come out more at night, so that's usually the more successful one. And we sort through all this green algae and weeds and stuff that all get collected into this cod end. It's a cylinder at the end of the trap, or the end of the mesh net. And we sort it out in these glass trays, and then it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, looking for these tiny larvae. But it has been done. Our crews have successfully found several larvae over the years. The reason for getting the eggs into the hatchery is so that we can increase their success of hatching, because the conditions in the hatchery are more well monitored than in the river. One of the shortfalls in the river right now is suitable gravel for the eggs to be laid in. So when the eggs are laid in the gravel and the juveniles hatch, they can hide in amongst the gravel. But in the Nechako River, there's a lot of sand and silt right now, and there's not that many areas with gravel. And one of our previous projects was to bring in gravel and make a couple of gravel pads. And those have been successful, but they have to be cleaned off. So to get the best success rate for these eggs, we bring them into the hatchery and then they raise them. Through many years of research on the sturgeon, and particularly on the early stages with the larvae, we've found that there's a lack of gravel in the Nechako that's suitable for sturgeon to spawn in. In all the years of looking, we've only found this one spawning reach in a vast area, a huge area. And the problem with the Nechako at Vanderhoof is that further up the Nechako, there's been big slides, and a lot of sand and material and silt has gone into the river, and it has made its way down and it's settled all around Vanderhoof. So there were gravels previously, but they get covered by this silt and sand. So one project that we came up with and that we got funded was to bring in some gravel and create these gravel beds for the sturgeon. So we brought in, what was it, like a barge. So we brought in a barge with gravel and created these pads. And then we put eggs directly on these pads to see how well they worked. And then in addition to that, we've been putting egg mats there every year after. And there's quite a bit of success for the sturgeon to go there and lay their eggs. And then we found that also there is still infilling of silt and sand in those gravel beds. So they do have to get washed out, rinsed out to maintain their effectiveness. The Carrier County Tribal Council is mostly a technical group. We are made up of 7 member nations at the moment. That has ranged, I think we've had up to like 10 member bands, and then a few less bands. And it's a large area. It stretches from Prince George out past Burns Lake to Wet'suwet'en. Then Burns Lake Band is a member, and we get to Stalaco near Fraser Lake, Notley, and then Sycaz south of Vanderhoof. And then we head north, and we go to Stewart Lake, and then we have Glasden at the end of the lake is a member, and Takla further north off of Takla Lake is also a member of our group. So we do different services. We have a government-to-government project that's going on with the province and the First Nations. So there's a lot of staff that have been hired to deal with different topics like moose and biodiversity and things. Then we have a fisheries department that's been with the Tribal Council since the AFS, or Aboriginal Fishing Strategy, began in about 1993. We've had a fisheries department that has focused mainly on work with salmon, and then in the early 2000s we began working with sturgeon as well. We also have a housing or technical services unit, so many technical services basically to help promote, well, to help the Carrier-Sicani people, to be of assistance to them, to have them be able to come to a central place to ask these different questions. So the Carrier-Sicani Tribal Council is mainly technical support for its member nations. At the moment we have 7 member nations, and they stretch all the way from Prince George out to Burns Lake, and then north up past Fort St. James up to Takla Landing. So it's a huge area that we represent. We go and we represent the nations at different meetings. There's for fisheries. Fisheries has been a part of the Tribal Council since about 1993. And we also have representatives from each First Nation come and attend these meetings. So it's a central place for people to come to get help with technical issues. We also have a housing department. We have a department that deals with the government-to-government agreement with the province and with the Carrier-Sicani First Nations. So we have many First Nations that are involved with our sturgeon projects. Our crews are made up of people from the different First Nations. Sycaz has been heavily involved, and people from Stalaco as well. And then for our boat kit project, we've had communities be a part of it from Claytley Tene near Prince George to Yakuche on the south side of Stewart Lake. We have a big involvement from Glasden. They have their own fisheries program as well, and they have a large bycatch monitoring project there. Takla Lake First Nation has been a part of it, and Nakasley has been a part of it on Stewart Lake. So many of these First Nations have been involved for years now and are really invested in this project. They want to help the sturgeon to survive. Sturgeon, or Claycho as it's known in the Dakelth language, are very important to the Carrier-Sicani people. They've been used for thousands of years. They were eaten. It's a rich fish, so not much was eaten, so a sturgeon would feed many people. There's also parts of the sturgeon that were used for medicine, and I don't know what else. I was thinking of something else. Food and medicine. So the sturgeon, or Claycho as it's known in the Dakelth language, Carrier language, is very important to the Carrie-Sakani people. They've been used for thousands of years. They used to eat them. It's a very rich fish, so a sturgeon would feed many people. And there's also medicinal values to the fish. Certain parts would be used for medicines. And the sturgeon were everywhere in each watershed. And so people are really concerned that this fish is diminishing. You know, it's been a part of their heritage and culture for so many years that they don't want to see it become lost. So sadly, since the sturgeon is now endangered, First Nations have not been able to directly target or harvest sturgeon for food or for medicinal purposes for many years now. The only way that sturgeon are encountered is if it's bycatch during fishing for salmon or char using a gill net. But unfortunately, no one is allowed to fish for them at the moment. And we hope that we can restore the population so that people may in the future be able to fish for them again. Whenever a sturgeon is encountered in a gill net, when people are fishing for salmon or char, then the goal is always to release them alive. So get them untangled and let them go again. Nechako white sturgeon are found throughout the watershed. They're found all over the Nechako River, going up to Fraser Lake. And there have even been reports of sturgeon south of Burns Lake. There's been sturgeon that go up through the Stewart River into Stewart Lake. They travel into Takla Lake through Trembler Lake. So they're really found in a wide area. What makes sturgeon so unique, or what I really find fascinating with them, is how old they are, how they are a living dinosaur, and how they haven't had a need to change in millions of years. They've just had the same shark-like body with these scutes on their bodies and have survived just fine. And then it's only in the recent years that they've had troubles. But I just think they're a fascinating fish. I think it's really cool how after their larva, soon after, they just look like miniature sturgeon. And then they just stay that way until they're over 100 years old. So I think they're amazing. They're found all over the world, to China and Europe. They look a little different, but they're basically the same kind of fish, and I think they're super cool. So everyone can be a part of helping the sturgeon to thrive and to continue to be a part of our watershed. People can look after the water. You can be out on the river and keeping an eye out for sturgeon. You may see them surface. Just being respectful of the environment and realize that even though you may not see them, they're out there. They're in lots of lakes and rivers and things. They have no teeth, so you don't have to be worried about them attacking you. But I think it's really worthwhile to try and protect these fish and the whole ecosystem. I mean, everything is connected. So when one thing is out of balance, it unbalances the rest of it. So I like sturgeons so much that I wanted a permanent reminder of them. And I got this tattoo when I was in Vienna for an international sturgeon conference. And this way, I get to ask people, this way, I get to talk about sturgeon even more because people ask me about my tattoo.